Hello, let's talk a little bit about solving quadratic equations. We've been working with quadratic equations as far as factoring them along the way, and we even just looked at some key parts as to graphing them, and we learned how to solve by graphing and identify the zeros or the roots and the solutions of a graph. But there are other ways that you can solve quadratic equations. To be exact, there are 4 other ways to solve quadratic equations. However, one of them we are not going to get in depth with right now. We're going to talk about it just briefly so that you know it exists, but we're not going to get into it too much. You can look down at the very bottom to see some notes on it if you are interested. The 4 ways that we can solve quadratic equations outside of graphing are factoring, the square root property, the quadratic formula, and completing the square. There are pros and cons to each of these 4 methods and reasons why we should or should not pick them while we are solving. So let's go through it. Factoring is typically the easiest and the fastest method. We've just spent a lot of time on factoring. So for you guys, it may be something easy to pop into. However, the con or the uh-oh in the situation is that the equation is not always factorable. Not every equation can be factored, therefore not every equation can be solved by factoring. Similarly to that is the square root property. The square root property is got a big pro. It's great for dealing with an equation where you see something squared. When we get into the examples, you'll see what I'm talking about. However, the big con here is the exact same thing. This is a very specific case. This is not always what we see. It is most often not what we are dealing with. So it is not a method that's going to work all the time. The one we are going to just hear about right now, but not really get into, is completing the square. The pro is that it always works. You can use it every single time, no matter what, and it will go extraordinarily well. The pro, wonderful, that's great, awesome. That's a big pro. You can always use it. No matter the equation, no matter the problem, it will work. However, the con is it can get ugly. Completing the square equations and completing the square as a solution option can get very messy and very unfriendly while we are solving it, so they can get ugly quickly. And similarly to that, quadratic formula has the same kind of vibe. The quadratic formula, you can always use it. It works in every situation. You can always plug things into the quadratic formula and solve. The con, once again, is that it can get ugly and that you need to remember the formula. If you do not know the quadratic formula and you do not know what to plug things into, that's where your problem falls. And then you won't be able to use it because you don't remember the formula you're supposed to be using. So real quick, I'm going to show you the steps and some examples for each of these methods. You have factoring, which we said was typically the easiest and fastest, however, does not always work. With an example for you to pause me if you'd like. The square root property, which is great, it's pretty easy to use. It's wonderful when we have something squared. However, we do not always have something squared, and it's not always the situation we are looking at, so it's not very useful all the time. And by something squared, I mean something just like this, where it says x squared equals 9, or x plus 2 squared equals 16. When I have things that are nicely squared like this, it does make it easy to work with. For example, like I was saying, x minus 2 squared equals 49 is another example of a place where it would be really great to use the square root property. The quadratic formula is wonderful if we use it correctly. As long as we know that big formula in the middle, we put all the terms to one side, leaving 0 on the other side. We substitute and simplify. In that box in the middle, it talks about the discriminant, which we will get into a little bit later, which helps to quickly tell the number of solutions that you are looking at, as well as an example for how to solve with the quadratic formula. And the final one, I will show it to you just so that you can see it. I will kind of breeze through it, is that completing the square option. Like I said, it does get a little bit ugly. if you are trying to complete the square, this is the least friendly looking of them all. And those are your 4 methods to solving quadratic equations. We're going to get into them a little bit in depth, one by one, and to see where it takes us. Good luck!